Welcome back, everybody, to the Making of video series where I, Riley James Thorpe, actor, comedian, filmmaker, discuss the various inspirations, making ofs, behind the scenes, pre-production, post-production, all that of the various short films that I work on. On this episode, I'm going to be discussing the making of my short film, The Customer is Always Right. So if you saw the last video, which was a making of the World War III Begins short, I'd mentioned that I wanted to turn this into an oncoming series, and I plan on making more of these, so please continue on. Make sure you subscribe, follow me, and check out whenever those new videos coming out, because I have a lot more coming out here pretty soon. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's on my YouTube channel. Here, I'll link it above. But if you have seen that video, I did mention The Customer's Always Right in that video. I mentioned how I had these 2 consecutive days off where I basically filmed both of those short films, The Customer's Always Right and World War III Begins, back to back. That's, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. It's a little bit further down the line, but it is important to know that where I kind of was at that time. I had just graduated from film school. I had just gotten a job. I was a deli at a grocery store. I've thought about this a lot. It's been some time, and that was the worst job I have ever worked in my life. Like, by far. Everything was wet. It smelled. I hated the work, coworkers, and I hated the customers especially. Now, I have worked in customer service my whole life. Ever since I was 14 years old. I still work in customer service right now, and it's not every single customer. But every once in a while, you get that person that just throws a tantrum over some random little thing that they're just whatever. Like, from personal experience, people will just cause problems for no reason and explode over the tiniest little thing. Now, I had just graduated from one of the best film schools in the country with a perfect GPA. I had just been flown to New York, where I networked with the CEOs of all the major retail companies in America through the NRF Foundation's 2022 Student Challenge, where my team and I placed 3rd in the nation. I had 300,000 social media followers. And here I am, slicing deli meats all day, getting bitched at by a bunch of people because they're sad and insecure and taking their whole day out. Now, of course, like I said, it's not everybody. I'm trying not to be like an entitled little kid about it. I understand that it's a job, this is life. You gotta get out there and make ends meet and do what it does, and it sucks sometimes. I understand that. But here I was just kind of back at it, dealing with that BS. I understand that everybody has a bad day, and I understand that one single action doesn't necessarily mean that this is who you are in your general life. Your value is not determined by this one single interaction you had with the barista at Starbucks. But again, I just gotten this job. I only worked there for a month because I got a much better job. Now, the inspiration for this short film came from one particular interaction I had with this one woman. I didn't put this woman's $4 worth of deluxe ham in the right bag she wanted, and this woman lost her damn mind on me and everybody in the area. This woman wanted it in this one particular bag. And despite the fact that I was apologizing, putting it in the correct bag she wanted, she was screaming for the manager to get over here. While I watched, she told my manager that I should be fired for disrespecting her and not knowing how to do my job properly. My manager said, okay, he'll put it in the right bag. I already zipped it up in the bag. Whatever, it's over. I handed her lady her food. Now, it wasn't necessarily her freaking out that inspired the short. It was the subsequent interactions I had after the fact. After she had freaked out at me, this woman actually did apologize. Spoiler alert. I'm gonna get to this a little bit later. I'm jumping ahead here. That part in the short film where the guy, he finally gets the cup, but then he's like berating the kids some more, just telling them, this is all your fault. That is almost word for word what this woman said to me in that interaction. She didn't apologize that what she had done or said was inappropriate. She apologized that I was an ignorant asshole, not doing my job properly, and everything that had happened was all my fault. She apologized for, quote, coming on too strong. She told me that everything she had done, she had absolutely every right to do because the customer's always right. She didn't say the words, the customer's always right, but it's that same mentality. So her apology was not an apology at all. That's why I use the words air quotes, her apology. And then she walked away. And then as I turned around to go continue doing my job for the rest of the day, I was met with all of my coworkers. And my coworkers said the most disrespectful, rude, hateful things about this woman as soon as she turned away. They were all like F and B words, C word, and I'm just like, okay, Jesus. I had this moment afterwards, because this, and keep in mind, this was also at the time where, around that same time, working in customer service nowadays has genuinely become dangerous. I'm not saying that I personally can relate to feeling like my life was ever in danger, but around that same time, there were stories, earlier that year, a guy guy whose son had an allergic reaction to a smoothie, so he went back to the smoothie shop, verbally and physically assaulted all the employees. 15-year-old, 16-year-old girls, and none of which were the ones that made the actual smoothie. There was another story of a guy who shot up a Subway sandwich shop because they put too much mayo in his sub. They killed 2 people because of over freaking mayonnaise. And it just comes back to this idea of people losing their minds, freaking out, acting like POSs because, I'm trying to censor myself because of YouTube, but acting like so disrespectfully and so rudely over the most insignificant of things. I had a guy one time, one of the first couple of customers to lash out like that was a grown man in his late 30s, early 40s. He used a credit card and I asked him to sign the receipt. He called me the R word. He told me that he was best friends with the owner of the place and told me that he was going to get me fired. All the while, his own child, a daughter who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, was just standing right next to him. I was 14 years old. I have been receiving end of people lashing out at customer service since I was a child. Everybody I worked with at that job and most other jobs in the world of customer service, that was either their first job. They were either in their teens just trying to make money. They had families and that was the only job they could get. They were just trying to make ends meet. And a lot of people I worked with at that particular job at the deli, they had emigrated from around the world. And again, that was really the only jobs they could have gotten. I'm not saying if you're a customer, you always should just roll over and accept whatever happens to you. I'm not saying that. If there's something legitimately wrong, if you personally are being disrespected, maybe they get their order wrong, don't be afraid to speak your mind. And I am not at all saying that customer service employees should have the right to like F you, screw you, get the hell out of my face or whatever. I'm not saying that they should have the right to disrespect customers whatsoever. But the fact is, if you are one of those people to just throw a tantrum for nothing and treat customer service employees like crap like that, just know you have all the power in that scenario. Because I really wanted in that moment, and that lady was screaming at me because of the bag she wanted, as much as I wanted to snap at her, I would have lost my job. You're not going to be the ones taken accountable. Worst they're going to do is they're just going to kick you out of the store if you're a customer. If you're the employee, like they can fire you. If you are that person that snaps at people like that, snaps at customer service employees like that, I just want you to know, in that interaction, you have all the power and you are choosing of your own free will to abuse that power so you can verbally assault children, people just trying to make ends meet. It's pathetic and you are not of value to anybody. And that's really what was going around in my head after I had that interaction with this woman. She straight up told me I deserve to be treated like that by her because she is of value. I'm just sitting there thinking like, who does this lady think she's of value to? Because clearly, it's not anybody that works here. It's not me. It's not any of my coworkers after how you just treated me. Guarantee you, it's not going to be my manager, the woman that personally interviewed, hired, and trained me. And it's not going to be her manager, the guy that personally interviewed, trained, and hired her. So who exactly are you of value to? The soulless billion-dollar corporation? Let me tell you something. I try not to talk about politics, but I'm going to take a moment to put on my anti-capitalist hat right now. These big billion-dollar companies, all we are is just a revenue stream. Whatever they can do to make sure that they get more of your money, that's what they're going to do. Beyond that, you are of no value to them. I was sitting there slicing meats, and I had this idea of whoever came up with the concept of the customer is always right is a marketing genius because it creates brand loyalty. Whenever you go to this one particular store, you're always treated well. You always get whatever you want. So that encourages you to come on back. And should anything else go wrong, it's never your fault. It's always someone else's fault. It just strokes your ego. It makes you feel like you're more of a value than you actually are. And that's all the term the customer is always right is. The customer is very frequently not right, but that also prevents the employees from defending themselves because if they do, it's all the blame is going to get put on them, not the customer. And God forbid that one customer feels so disrespected that they never shop at any of that chain ever again. It's not that big of a deal because we have the other million people that shop there every single day. You don't matter. I don't matter. All that matters is money. And then from there, I had this idea, this image in my head, a CEO of a company sitting at a table with an advertising agent. The creation of the customer is always right. And it interspliced with what it is nowadays, the logical progression of that 60, 70 years later, which is grown adults verbally abusing the employees who are just desperately trying to make ends meet. Sometimes they're underage, just being treated like absolute garbage over the most insignificant, minute things because the customer is always right. And from there, the short pretty much wrote itself. I went home, I wrote out the entire draft of the first draft of the script, I revised it over the next couple of days, making a satirical comedy, a funny little sketch, like fictitiously dramatizing the creation of that term. Obviously, this is not a direct adaptation of anything that actually happened. So the whole entire short was essentially just going to be a lot of exposition, a lot of just characters sitting, talking to each other, creating the idea of the customer is always right, born out of corporate greed, and how that corporate greed essentially led to nowadays where people are genuinely being hurt by this mentality of, I want what I want. You give me exactly what I want because I have power over you. Having a CEO of a company sitting at a table with an ad agent discussing the idea like, ooh, this is going to make us so much money, and then intercut that with footage of a child just desperately trying to make ends meet, just being verbally abused by this random asshole, all over $1 worth of soda at a cheap, shitty fast food restaurant. That's essentially the idea. So that was the inspiration. I want to talk about the actual making, the actual production of the short. The original draft of the script was about 12 pages, which in hindsight, it ended up being a lot longer than I think I was even expecting it to. Generally speaking, when it comes to writing a script, to adapting it, it's generally about a page a minute. So yeah, ended up being a lot longer than I was expecting. But like I said, much like the World War III Begins, I filmed it in the exact same, the kitchen in my apartment on a green screen. I actually filmed this one first because I'd grown a lot of facial hair by that point, and I wanted to, since I was playing all the characters, I wanted to, for each character, shave off different parts of my facial hair. The idea I was going for was, since I'm playing all the characters, I just wanted to get at this idea of like, all the people, they look exactly the same because we're all just people trying to make ends meet. But the problem is there's a lot of people who are trying to screw each other over, just trying to make more money, trying to abuse their power, giving this idea of like, we're all the same, but we aren't treating each other like the same. That's essentially what I was trying to get at by myself playing all the characters and myself shaving bits of my facial hair off. I love people in the comment section of that video who are like, dude, you really committed. You actually grew out and strategically shaved. Hey, I take it seriously. Whereas the World War III Begins, I feel like that short film, the camera work was purposefully very static. But with this short film, I really wanted to, I made a shot list, I really wanted to make the camera work and the angles a lot more dynamic. Instead of just a static shot, which was of course the point and worked absolutely very well for the World War III Begins, I felt like. I wanted the camera work to fit the script because the script was a lot more dynamic as well. It had a lot more energy to it. It was all conversations. A lot of those conversations were very heightened in terms of emotion at least. So with characters, I would film myself looking off screen as if talking to somebody and then film the reverse shot of that after the fact. So I wanted the angles to be a little different. And, you know, the CEO and the ad agent, they're pretty on the same level. The cameras are at eye line, but the difference between the kid and the customer, the angle, it's more facing upwards at him, giving him a more domineering presence, threatening, kind of powerful. The camera's angled downwardly on the child, making him feel smaller and weaker, essentially. I put a lot more thought and care into the camera angles and camera placement as well. Now again, this was also my first real time working on a green screen as well. Looking back, I'm surprised it turned out as well as it did. In the last video, I talked a lot in depth of how like each short film focused more on like cinematic lighting, color grading, audio mixing, working on a green screen. But now with this particular short, I really wanted to explore a new idea that I had started to take interest in, which was making the video footage that I record, making it look like a different type of video footage. The scenes that take place in the 1950s, I knew I was going to make that like black and white to make it more appropriate for the time period, but what if I went a step further than that? Not only do I make it black and white, but I go the extra step and making the footage look like actual old film stock. And the audio from that will make it sound like it's recorded on old vinyl, making those clips look and feel like they were filmed in the 1950s. So I learned how to do that as well. For the backgrounds, where I replaced the green screens with all free stock images that I got offline. But then on top of the footage for the scenes that took place in the 1950s, I also put an overlay. And I'm really proud of that. I actually sent this short film to my buddy Raylan. He told me he had no idea that the scenes that took place in the 1950s were filmed on a green screen. It looked so good, and that I'm very proud of. Now, on the flip side of that, the scenes that take place in the modern day, they clearly are on a green screen. But that was on purpose. I essentially wanted the modern day stuff to feel and look as cheap and crappy as possible. I mean, just look at the costume I'm wearing. There's no label there. What I did was I took pieces of Scotch tape, put them over the label, and I wrote in Sharpie, Fast Food Co. Like, this is not a good quality restaurant, food, situation, none of it. So I wanted essentially the modern day scenes to look visually visually to video what fast food is to food. Yeah, those scenes are clearly on a green screen, but that was entirely by design. So on top of all that, in terms of myself portraying the characters, when it comes to the character of the CEO, and he had a big beard, he had a big cigar, I modeled that character off of one of my favorite comedic performances in one of my favorite comedy movies. That, of course, being Mel Brooks' performance in Blazing Saddles. He, of course, plays the governor in that movie. He's the person with the most power and authority, and yet he's the biggest dumbass of them all. Well, with that being said, I imagine you can tell pretty easily where the inspiration come from. Now, if you look closely in the movie, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that the CEO character is cross-eyed in the movie. I can do that like this. It adds to the fact that this guy's just a doofus. Periodically throughout the film, I kind of lose the cross-eyed a little bit. I also look like I'm squinting part of the time. Acting is very, very hard. Acting to no one on a green screen is even harder. Acting on a green screen while you are also the director of photography, lighting the scene, it's very, very hard as well. Doing all of that cross-eyed is even harder. That became really challenging in editing. There were takes of mine where I was like squinting because I'm like trying to keep it. It's really hard. But then there are other times where I'm just like, you know what? My eyes are open. They're not cross-eyed. Let's just do it. Advertising agent. In particular, I slicked my hair back and I had a clean shaven face. And I decided to dress myself like Don Draper from the AMC series Mad Men. I went out with this character, making him more of like a suave, slick type guy. He's the devil on the shoulder. The angel flew the coop long ago. There is no angel in this story. So I just wanted to portray him as this devilish, vampiric character. Very conniving. But the thing about the advertising agent is, if you look closely, every time it cuts to the character, he always is finished with a cigarette. And he puts it down, he pulls out another one, puts it in his mouth. But then it cuts to a reverse shot of the CEO, and it cuts back to the ad agent, and he had already finished the cigarette. So in that time frame, he had already finished the cigarette. It was kind of attributing this idea of at that time, and even obviously in Mad Men, which is an incredible show, they're just chain-smoking cigarettes. So that's kind of what I was doing. I didn't want to actually light the cigar and the cigarettes, because I just figured acting to myself with no one on a green screen, while operating the camera, directing, lighting the scene, worried about the green screen, adding an open flame to that mix? No, that's too far. The child, that kid was inspired by not a particular situation that I had been in, but it was inspired by a kid that I had gone to high school with. Now, I was a freshman when he was a senior. I didn't know him personally, but I was aware of his situation. His parents had just both gotten laid off from work, and their family was basically doing whatever they needed to do to survive. This kid, while going to school full-time, he was also working almost like full-time hours at work. He was falling asleep in class. While knowing that that was happening, imagine this, like some 17, 18-year-old kid is working whatever fast food job he was working. And then someone comes in and is all like, I didn't get what I wanted for free, F you, starts screaming. Like, if people who threatened to get me fired, if that legitimately had any weight to it, I also know that, like, if I had gotten fired from that job, yeah, it would suck. I'd have to go back and go get a new job. But this guy, his whole family's depending on him. When you're having a one-on-one interaction with people, you don't know who they are. You don't know what they're going through. I guess you didn't know that treating them like crap was going to have as much of an effect on them, but you shouldn't have been treating them like crap to begin with. Having the audience know this carries so much more weight to that kid, relating us more to him. Now, the customers, I just portrayed them like assholes. The manager, another thing I really wanted to talk about with this particular short that became very apparent was cutting up your baby. Now, if you're a filmmaker and you have a movie, you have a script, you have a full, edited out, cut up, featured up movie, and you love every single frame, you wouldn't change anything about it, but you show it to test audiences, you show it to friends, family, whatnot, and they say, wasn't so much of a fan of this scene, didn't really like that went on a little too long, that subplot doesn't make any sense. You gotta trim that stuff out for the betterment of the movie. Like, trust me, the original script for this movie was 12 pages. The original rough cut was 12 minutes, but I recognized while editing that there was stuff that I had written that I thought was good, I thought was funny, and it is. In terms of the actual pacing of the short, I got to cut it out. A lot of them did involve the manager. There was a bit of a subplot there where it kind of established the idea that the manager and the kid were friends. Getting at this idea of like, kid being like, oh, you want to talk to my manager? Well, my manager and I are friends. But I felt like showing the audience that the manager and the kid are friends, that's kind of giving them a lifeline, kind of giving them hope. The idea that, oh no, the kid's going to be okay. And that kind of directly went against everything I wanted to achieve with this short, because I wanted to just portray something that was a scene that was so hopeless but so grounded in reality that audiences can relate to. So a lot of the stuff with the manager was cut. There's two plot lines going through. The CEO and the ad agent, everything they're saying, creating the customer's always right, being parallel to its modern day equivalent of what they're saying, what that's eventually leading to, the kid getting verbally assaulted by the customer. The pacing has to come one after the other. Having that whole third plot just kind of that's there off to the side, it broke with the pacing, and it also just kind of ruined the emotion of the scene. So I had to just trim that out. You gotta accept the fact that you need to do what's best for your film, and that means sometimes trimming it down to make it more tight. I went from 12 minutes to being 8.5. That's a lot. I probably should have written it knowing that, but at the same time, I'd rather write too much than write and trim it down later than write too little and then realize at the right as we're about to end, be like, oh crap, we don't have enough. So I think it worked out for the better. It doesn't just apply to short films I'm working on. I see big budget movies nowadays where I'm like, you could have trimmed 15, 20, 30 minutes, even hour plus from this movie. Big Hollywood movies that are coming out in theaters that I've actually seen recently. The post-production process of this short was very, very long. I knew going into it that I was going to make the World War III Begins first because that had been a long time coming. I also think I wanted to make that one first because it was a lot more simple than this one. 8.5 minutes on a green screen with overlays. What you have to do with a green screen, as I mentioned before, you got to key out the background, but then you got to adjust it to where the subject itself isn't affected by the removal of the green screen. Not only take out the green screen, but you got to adjust the footage of the subject. And not only that, but then you got to replace the background with that stock image. But then you got to adjust the settings of the subject in the background to make it look like it's all in the same location. And then on top of that, again, like I said, the scenes that take place in the 1950s, I had to put an overlay to that to make it look like it was an old school film. Different effects, different settings, stuff like that. And you have to do that for every single clip and every single frame of this 8.5 minute short film. It was a big undertaking and it took me months. I kind of worked on it off and on throughout the year 2022. I was in the middle of working in this when I decided I wanted to do work on the 50 States sketch series, which is another video series, that another making of documentary I want to make here pretty soon as well. Stay tuned for that. I had started a whole second project. My completion of that series kept getting pushed back and back and back and back until finally it was kind of towards the end of the year. I wasn't going home for Christmas, and I just said to myself, I'm going to be disappointed with myself if I don't at least finish one of the big projects I started this year. For the last couple weeks of December, I just cranked out this video, and voila, it was a lot of work, months of editing, but I finally got it done, posted it out there. Now, the problem you run into at that point, as big of a following as I have on TikTok and Instagram, I'm in the early stages of gaining a bigger following on YouTube. I don't have quite as big of a following on there. So essentially, I spent months working on a video that only a handful of people were seeing. But another thing that I really wanted to focus on with this particular short film was the idea of marketing. Now, I have a minor in creative advertising. I mentioned the NRF Foundation Student Challenge. That was a marketing competition. I worked in a team, of course. But essentially, I'm like, what's the point of spending all this time making a whole short film? What's the point of having 300,000 followers on social media if I can't merge the two together? My most viewed regular video by that point was my short film Silence of the Karens. That had about 600 views. And I decided I'm going to double that. And within 2 weeks of all the marketing, networking, stuff like that, posting it on Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, my short film, The Customer's Always Right, not only became my most viewed, but it also reached my goal of 1.2 thousand views in less than 2 weeks. I went into this short film thinking I want to do a green screen but make it more dynamic. On top of doing that, I also ended up learning a very valuable lesson in cutting up your baby, if that's what it requires, marketing, and I also learned how to overlay, make new modern day footage filmed on a DSLR look and sound like it was filmed on old school film and vinyl. I really did learn a lot. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. That's pretty much the entire making of it. A lot of it, in terms of the actual technical stuff, was very similar to the World War III Begins. So I think another reason why a lot of people really enjoyed this particular short was because I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. I know a lot of people that work in customer service, and I've sent these to some of my friends who are all like, dude, I worked this job. I had a guy who said that exact same thing to me. I know people that not only work in customer service, But they also work all over the place, like in education, medicine, tourism, all of that can relate to this idea of like having to sit there, bite your tongue at the receiving end of this irrational, unreasonable a-hole, and you can't say anything, so you're just sitting there like, okay, yep. Sorry you feel that way. Yep, I'm sorry. Just gotta bite your tongue because that's what the job entails. Because you're a thinking, rational human being. But the problem is you're not talking to one. And you know what? I honestly hope that most people do relate to it. Because if this achieves anything, before you snap at someone, just think to yourself, is how I'm about to react, is that really gonna work for my scenario? Like, am I being rational with my thoughts and feelings right now? Because I guarantee you, you're not. I'm not advocating customer service employees be disrespectful. From the perspective of the customers, I'm not saying that you should allow customer service employees, should it be the case that they're disrespecting you, you shouldn't be allowed to be treated like that either. I'm just saying, we all need to take a moment to get along and realize what we're at. Life sucks for everybody, okay? Making it worse for each other is not going to help. So yeah, that was the making of The Customer Is Always Right, a short film. I really enjoyed making it. It's something that means a lot to me, and it got a really good response as well. I learned a lot from it, and I hope that everybody out there, at least seemingly, has gotten a lot of value out of it too. If you haven't yet, please check it out on my YouTube channel. Subscribe for more, and I will hopefully see you guys next time in the next making of video. Thank you.